Good morning and welcome back to the lecture series. We are discussing existentialism. Today we are going to discuss a text by Fyodor Dostoevsky. So today we are going to discuss Fyodor Dostoevsky's novel Crime and Punishment and see the element of existentialism that has been deployed, that has been understood in Crime and Punishment. We will see how existentialism is a subject or a matter that has been very extensively dealt with in a text such as Crime and Punishment. So, existentialism is a philosophical perspective which emphasizes the significance and distinctiveness of human existence, opposing the inclination towards comprehensive systems that encompass all aspects of reality. So, existentialism as a philosophical approach, as a philosophical school, emerged notably in the 20th century in France, especially during the first half of the 20th century in the decades of 1930 and 1940, right? So, and existentialism focuses on the individual's existence and it draws on ideas and reflections from the 19th century reaction against Hegel. So, Hegelian notion of spirit, we have already talked about it, right? Hegel talks about zeitgeist, the spirit of the age, which defines all the different components, all the different cultural expressions of that age. So, the zeitgeist has its reflections on and it speaks to the socio-cultural components, even the economic components, the different expressions, the different manifestations of a particular period. This is what Hegel has to say. On the other hand, we have phenomenology or existentialism, which opposes the German idealism. The German idealism's goal of seeking systematic totality at the expense of overlooking the lived experiences, the live experiences of the individual human being. So, on the one hand, we have the notion of idealism, which talks about systems, which talks about an entire period, and the spirit of that period having its influence on individual actions, individual behavior, individual expressions. And on the other, we have phenomenology, we have existentialism, which focuses more on the individual rather than an entire period or an entire age or an entire movement or tendency. So, the idealist school merges the lived experience within a higher form, and therefore, it would accord an immanent rational structure to the higher form, to the system. So, the way we behave draws on the system, draws on the spirit of the age. There is a larger system that defines our individual behavior. This is where idealism is coming from, German school of idealism. On the other hand, phenomenology or existentialism is suspicious of such rational structures that render inertness or render some kind of secondariness, some kind of subsidiary status to the dynamism and spontaneity that characterize lived and live experience. According to existentialism and phenomenology, the school of existentialism, the individual's behavior cannot be measured through such calculated rational structures. Individual is always more than any kind of essence that tries to define and subsume it. The distinction between the two schools result in a number of irreconcilable dichotomies such as systematicity versus individuality, rational necessity versus freedom, and so on. In the case of Fyodor Dostoevsky's novel Crime and Punishment, Dostoevsky delves into the psychological struggle that is faced by a criminal that happens to be the protagonist of this novel. The central character and protagonist, Raskolnikov, seeks to define his existence through the act of murdering an elderly pawnbroker. Early in the narrative, we see Raskolnikov murdering an elderly pawnbroker, and the rest of the novel deals with the intricacies, the complexities of his emotions, the psychological nuances, and the struggles that Raskolnikov faces henceforth in the novel. So, this murder committed by Raskolnikov is motivated by the belief that the pawnbroker perpetuates poverty. The image of the pawnbroker is that of someone that perpetuates poverty. Such an act of murder is therefore considered as a free choice representing an expression of human freedom, freedom from poverty, a conscious freedom from and breakaway from poverty. However, the way the novel proceeds can also be viewed as contradictory to one's freedom. The author explores Raskolnikov and his sense of freedom through an existentialist lens, particularly drawing on Jean-Paul Sartre's concept of existentialism, Sartre's existentialist philosophy. One of Dostoevsky's basic ideas was that irrationality of human beings is something. So, Dostoevsky, we see, is really interested in delving into and in exploring the concept of irrationality of human beings. Dostoevsky assumes a significant responsibility for exploring the irrational aspects of human nature, particularly the cruel, distressing, and shameful facets of life. He portrays and deliberates on these phenomena through his characters, and he aims to discover certain resolutions, right? You know how the characters are floundering through their irrationality and trying to reach some kind of resolution. It appears that Dostoevsky's outlook towards life is influenced by his own life experiences. So, it appears that Dostoevsky's outlook towards life is influenced by his own life experiences. The protagonist of the narrative is a young man who holds the belief that he possesses both the ability and the entitlement to challenge certain fundamental principles of humanity. He thereby, he posits and he asserts his individuality in an extreme fashion through an extreme act such as committing of murder. In a way, celebrates his individuality. Earlier, while discussing Kafka, we have seen that killing oneself, becoming an insect, like in the case of Gregor Samsa, who flies off the window in the end in Metamorphosis, we see these are different manifestations of one's individuality as a way of defying the coercive deterministic forces of the outer world. Here we see murder becomes another such expression, an extreme expression to defy what the society has to give us, this coercive aspects of the society. So we see that untimely Raskolnikov experiences failure, and the manner in which he fails reveals much about the internal laws that govern him. Dostoevsky essentially conveys a concept uh, which adheres with Freud's perspective. The fact that humans are not the sole masters of their own inner realms, right? Not everything can be calculated, predetermined, and controlled. So, in Crime and Punishment, the central axis of opposition revolves around the conflict between good and evil, serving as the foundational element which shapes the narrative and which brings coherence to the intricate web of opposing forces. The primary dichotomy or opposition between good and evil, representing the clash between spiritual vitality, which is, a symbol of good, and spiritual decay, which is a symbol of evil, remains unbreachable. So that's where we see the modern and the postmodern fragmented condition of human, because the two aspects cannot in the end be reconciled and thereby a resolution attained. The human self, the quest for self, the quest for a kind of solution, the quest for an answer to a problem that life poses cannot be attained, cannot be easily cracked, which is why we have unbridgeable conditions. We have fragmented, broken conditions in the modern and postmodern times. So, we see that there is this unbridgeable gap between the good on the one hand and the evil on the other. So, consequently, the progression of oppositions between good and evil unfolds through a series of intricate substitutions which facilitate a mediation between the opposing forces, right? So, the torque of the novel, the force, the driving force of the novel is derived from this oppositional tendency between the good and the evil. There are always two opposing, two conflicting factors that drive the narrative forward, right? And in the end, there is necessarily no resolution. Like I said, at the core of Raskolnikov's descent into moral decay lies a fundamental exploration of humanity in terms of the interplay between good and evil, as well as the manifestation of freedom in each individual. So, this freedom, this kind of freedom, however, when actualized, has a potential to degrade itself through succumbing to enslavement. For Raskolnikov, this kind of enslavement is evident in the adoption of certain ideas that are imposed on him, ideas that are ill suited for his holistic well-being. The underground man experiences enslavement to distorted emotions, whereas the masses submit to what Dostoevsky in another novel would call the Grand Inquisitor. So, the general tendency of the common humans is to submit to the Grand Inquisitor. We will talk more about it. This opposition between good and evil and the freedom associated with each becomes the focus, the focal point through the dramatic mediation of the different characters, right? How the good and the evil are being dealt with is manifested through the mediation of different characters. And so we see that on the one hand there is the individual will, there is a question of phenomenology, the question of existentialism that celebrates, one's own will, that celebrates human living, being and acting beyond any rational structure. And on the other hand, there is an unthinking mass that repeatedly keeps doing because they have been told to do, right? So I'll just explain the concept of the Grand Inquisitor before we move further. The Grand Inquisitor is a story within a story in Dostoevsky's 1880 novel, The Brothers Karamazov. So the Grand Inquisitor is recited by the character of Ivan Karamazov, who questions his brother Alexei, that has become a monk, about the possibility of a personal God, right? Not a God that has been institutionalized and, that is followed through some meta structures and meta belief system. So, how about having one's own God, right? One's own notion of and one's own imagination of God. So, Grand Inquisitor becomes a long diatribe that is directed at Jesus. It reflects the fundamental ambiguity entrenched in the human nature, and it is deeply inspired by the question of freedom. The Grand Inquisitor remarks that only the principles of the devil can lead to mankind's unification. Any dictator's dream is that mankind will behave in a uniform manner, right? All kinds of differences, all kinds of free will, all kinds of uniqueness will thereby be bulldozed and erased. And according to the Grand Inquisitor's diatribe, this is the way of the devil. Because it vouches such a uniformity, such a unification, vouches for a mediocre, mundane life at the expense of controlling, human conscience. It's a way of controlling free will and human conscience. While Jesus himself had limited his preachings, his teachings to a small group of chosen ones, one sees that the Catholic Church interprets Jesus and addresses all people. The Church rules the world in the name of God, in the name of Jesus, but in effect, according to the Grand Inquisitor, it operates with the devil's principles. So, the interpretation of God that is taken up by any human being and that is imposed, in a deterministic, over-deterministic fashion over an entire mankind, over an entire humanity, is, possible only through abiding by the devil's principles. The God's way is not to collapse humanity into any kind of oneness. So Jesus was mistaken in holding man in high esteem, and so we see that the Inquisitor's speech is constantly, throwing a diatribe at Jesus, but Jesus remains silent throughout the speech. And we can treat the Grand Inquisitor's speech as a commentary on the fundamental difference between spirituality and any kind of organized, institutionalized religion. How bifurcated they are in terms of their goals and in terms of their imaginations, right? The exploration unveils a fundamental moral and spiritual dimension within individuals that exists beneath the surface of being enslaved to externally imposed and coercive ideas. I mean, this is something that so many thinkers have talked about. We have a rational self, we have an external, exterior self that functions according to its that functions in order to adjust with the outside society. That is our outer self, our outer persona. But beneath that, there is some kind of freedom of choices, freedom of will that we are exercising, which is not a slave to the rational structures and institutions. It is from this underlying dimension that the potential for an individual's regeneration emerges. If we are able to regenerate, it is because of our our potential, our desire to be an individual, our desire to exercise our free will and thereby exist actually. Otherwise, we will just become an essence without existence. So, the murder that Raskolnikov commits results from his dependence on society, whereas Raskolnikov's acceptance or coming in terms with, coming face to face with his act results from his freedom from the society actually. Till the end, one sees that even after confession and the resultant penal servitude that Raskolnikov serves, he is still struggling to acknowledge the moral culpability for his crime and feeling himself to be, guilty of weakness. So, till the end, even after confession and resultant penal servitude, we see that Raskolnikov is struggling to acknowledge the moral culpability of his crime, the moral culpability for his crime, and he is feeling himself as guilty only of weakness. In prison, his redemption and moral regeneration begin under Sonia's loving influence. So, Sonia becomes a kind of an messiah-like character in his life that enables his regeneration. The understanding of justice varies from person to person due to one's distinct consciousness. Consequently, a precise definition of justice becomes challenging and impossible to realize as a concept, because it is inherently fluid. What justice means for one may be different from what it means for another. So, Raskolnikov, then we have the character of Vidrigailov and also Sonia. All of them exemplify different notions of justice, seemingly contradictory in the given circumstances. So, the struggles between reason and feelings at the heart of crime and punishment springs from the historical setting of problems arising from the ideology of the Russian radicals of the mid 1860s. The primary existential theme in the current novel revolves around human suffering, and this concept of human suffering serves as a catalyst for the characters, the different characters' self-realization and comprehension of life's circumstances. The philosophical theories in the narrative are shaped by the characters' realizations. The protagonist, Raskolnikov, and other characters such as Marmeladov, Katerina Ivanovna, Sonia, Luzin, and Vidrigalov embody aspects, various aspects of nihilism as well as existentialism in different sense. So, Dostoevsky endows Raskolnikov with an intricate thought process, rendering him suitable for psychological scrutiny. It is Raskolnikov's ideals and thought patterns which propel him into the existential dilemmas of existence. So, Raskolnikov believes in the philosophy of extraordinary man rather than the ordinary human. And this is an excerpt from Crime and Punishment. I am going to read out. I quote, "The point is that in his article, people fall into two classes, the ordinary and extraordinary. The ordinary must be submissive and have no right to transgress the laws because of their ordinariness, you see, but the extraordinary have the right to commit any crime and break any law just because they are extraordinary, unquote. Since Raskolnikov falls into the category of an extraordinary individual, or that is what he thinks, that is what he posits, he is indifferent to the repercussions of his crime, justifying his actions within the premises of unrestricted freedom and free will. He constantly uses Napoleon as a point of reference, Napoleon Bonaparte, by saying, I quote, such man as Napoleon is above the common laws of humanity because he had the daring to commit various acts in order to complete his plans, unquote. The selection made by an individual holds significant importance in Dostoevsky's novel because it can either lead to glorification or degradation. See, when an individual is ordinary and his or her acts are determined by some external social institutions, they do not necessarily have to take the responsibility of the consequences. It becomes the responsibility of the society because the society is making one do and think. However, when an individual has the choice, the free choice to act, to think, to be, which is something we see in the case of Dostoevsky's different novels, such choices, such acts that in a way anchor, that in a way prop up one's existence, can either lead to glorification or to degradation. Dostoevsky refrains from imposing any kind of obstacles between an individual and their choices. It is entirely up to the individual to decide whether to tread the path of good or evil, and likewise, consequently, face the the result of their action, the fruit of their action. So, the characters of Razumikin and Raskolnikov, despite being very good friends, make disparate choices, and that's where their individuality lies. Raskolnikov opts for the path of evil, considering himself as extraordinary. So, Raskolnikov embarks on a personal journey seeking punishment, which leads him through places of alienation, inner conflicts, and eventual acceptance. Initially, he believed he could evade the truth and suffering, but over a period of time, we see that a compassionate connection with Sonia, who is a messiah-like figure in his life and who is rooted in her own hardship, penetrates his emotional defenses. And in a way, one can see that Raskolnikov towards the end is also transforming. Sonia's presence fortifies Raskolnikov's fragile existence, acting as a passive but redemptive force which facilitates the hero's spiritual regeneration and rebirth. So, through Sonia's experiences of suffering, Raskolnikov comes to comprehend the harsh reality of human existence. When he sees how much of suffering Sonia has gone through, he can comprehend, he can come to terms with the harsh reality that life is. In a symbolic sense, Sonia embodies a Christ-like figure, or maybe an earth mother-like figure, representing self-sacrifice in a world that is marked by chaos and decay. Unlike Raskolnikov, who relies on intellect, Sonia acts as an antithesis to his theory of the extraordinary man, something that has actually led to his downfall. So, Sonia's presence actually transforms him, like I said. Dostoevsky consistently criticizes scientific knowledge, emphasizing its limitation in predicting human choices. So, human life cannot be predicted through a mathematical calculation. Human life cannot be predicted through any kind of precise mathematical calculation. Human life is always more or less, and all the mathematics of human life do not match in the end. So, humans behave, they think, they do through certain underlying irrational forces too. Raskolnikov, devoid of humanism and faith in justice, becomes entangled in chaos and moral quandaries which take up the bulk of this narrative, crime and punishment. So, Vidrigalov, on the other hand, which is another character in the novel, emerges as a crucial existential character, serving as a reflection of Raskolnikov's thoughts and existential lifestyle. Raskolnikov harbors animosity towards Vidrigalov because the latter embodies everything that Raskolnikov could not achieve. Vidrigailov initially embraced the same kind of life implied by and embodied by Raskolnikov's extraordinary theory, but in the end could not sustain it. So, Sonia's arrival in this narrative prompts Raskolnikov to rediscover his human warmth, which prompts him to retract from this fundamental theory of being an extraordinary human. In contrast, Vidrigailov, who is devoid of human warmth, persists in leading an amoral, one could say a nihilist life, acting freely according to his own will. So, Vidrigailov takes actions boldly without being confined by rational consciousness, unlike the hero and the protagonist. Vidrigailov does not repent for his actions, and his ultimate submission to the darker aspects of the existence therefore differ from Raskolnikov. Raskolnikov actually has a kind of positive transformation and a reconciliation within himself under the auspices of or under the influence of Sonia, which does not happen in the case of Vidrigailov. So, when Vidrigailov comes to terms with this darker side of his existence, when he realizes he cannot endure living in a world that is darkened by his own evil actions, and so he contemplates suicide. His egoism prevents him from submitting to faith, to the rule of nature, and to the principles of Christianity. The entire novel can be seen as a narrative of suffering, with all characters, whether major or minor, undergoing some kind of internal turmoils, and this is very symptomatic of the modern and the postmodern human existence that I have been talking about again and again. This forms a chief component, a chief ingredient in the making of the modern and the postmodern novel. The novel as a form does not vouch for, does not look for any kind of a whole and organic, self or a reconciled meaning where all answers to all problems are given. So, salvation or tranquility is only attainable through the acceptance of suffering, through the acceptance that human condition is flawed and full of lapses. So, Sonia comprehends this fundamental truth of life, that human life is made up of suffering. So, she chooses not to complain about her father's actions and instead dedicates herself to alleviating the problems of others. Despite so much of hardship in her own life, she dedicates herself to solving or alleviating others' problems. Even after her father's death, Raskolnikov supports her family financially, and in return, Sonia provides silent strength and support for Raskolnikov during his critical period. She encourages him to confess his crime and accompanies him to Siberia, guiding him throughout towards goodness and faith. Inspired by Sonia's recounting of Lazarus's resurrection, Raskolnikov takes the New Testament with him to the penal servitude in Siberia, and we see that towards the end of this novel, when he is serving his penal servitude in Siberia, he is placing the New Testament, the Bible, under his pillow. So Sonia's intervention resolves the hero's psychological dilemma, ushering in a new life that is marked by love, care, sympathy, faith, humanity, and ultimately kindness. And so we see that there is a kind of warmth inside Raskolnikov. The emotional components in him kind of open up, right? Something that had become closed open up. Ultimately, love triumphs over the extraordinary theory of logic and reason, signifying the hero and the protagonist's gradual transition from one world or one world view into another. So Sonia not only provides encouragement to Raskolnikov, but also extends her support to other convicts, urging them to embrace suffering as a means of alleviating the burden of guilt, the guilt of the misdeed that they have done in the past. Sonia derives happiness from sustaining Raskolnikov throughout the trial. Additionally, we see that she perceives the dawn of happiness for both of them at the conclusion of their prison term. So, at the end of this long tunnel, this long dark tunnel of servitude, of suffering, of kind of confessing guilt and purgation, there is some kind of light in the end, at the end of the tunnel. So Raskolnikov's inner world finds expression in the destinies of Svidrigailov and Marmeladov. The roles of Svidrigailov and Marmeladov are viewed as reinforcing the central theme within the symphonic structure of this novel. In the epilogue, the reader encounters Raskolnikov amid the expansive and desolate Siberian landscape, and we find as readers that his mind is filled with a profound sense of vacuum, emptiness. Despite a hint of optimism towards the conclusion, there is an awareness among the readers that Raskolnikov has suffered substantial losses in the due course of his internal struggle. So with this, we come to the end of our lecture today. Thank you.